Now, one part of this article that I found kind of confronting is the idea that the patient can choose between taking the medicine themselves or having a health practitioner administer the medications to them. And that's actually not something I've thought about before. I've never thought about being the doctor that would administer the medicine that could end the life of a person. Good morning, Dr. Sill here, junior doctor from Sydney, Australia. And I just saw in the news that voluntary assisted dying has become legalised in New South Wales, which is the state that I live in. Now, voluntary assisted dying, also known as voluntary euthanasia, is a controversial legislation, and I think it's very important that we discuss these things and have open, respectful debates about them, so that everyone can have their views heard and that society can move in the way that most people think is the appropriate way for society to move. So right off the bat, I thought I would just share my biases with you guys so that you know which angle that I perceive this topic through. And that is that I am for voluntary assisted dying. I think that it's important to have a good death. So, so many people don't see birth as a pathology, right? Which is good. And in the same way that being born isn't a disease, dying is not a disease. It is part of life. And it's important that we are mature and are sensitive to people's wishes around dignity and comfort. There's a lot of myths around palliative care and dying, and we should probably go through some of them. So number one, a lot of people think that with euthanasia, people are in extreme pain, and that's not true. So I will link to the podcast down below with an interview Norman Swan did with someone who's an expert in palliative care. But if someone is under good palliative care service, only about 2% of people have pain in the days preceding their death. With voluntary assisted dying, which is already legal in every other state except for New South Wales, the main reason for wanting voluntary assisted dying is not about pain, it's actually about dignity and comfort. It's when people have lost autonomy, they can't move, they need people to wipe their bums after pooing, and they don't feel like that's the way they want to live, and they have a terminal illness that will almost certainly end their life in the next 6 months. Another interesting myth to talk through before we start on the article is that it's a common thing that 75% of people wish to die at home, and it ends up being that 75% of people die in hospital. That's a common thing that I hear. It's just worth pointing out that those numbers are based off of surveys when people are well, and actually as people become unwell towards their last days of life, they do wish to go to hospital or they just wish appropriate management of their acute issues, so their pain or their urinary retention or whatever the problem is at the time. So circumstances do change and people's wishes do change, and people are often more likely to be happy to pass away in a palliative care facility if it means that their pain is well managed. If you're interested in knowing more about palliative care, by the way, I did an episode on my podcast, Doctors Getting Coffee, with Dr. Frank Brennan, who's a palliative care physician in Sydney, Australia. And he also shares poetry and short stories about patients, and that's his form of coping and expression and art. And it was a really beautiful conversation, and I'll put a link down below as well to that, because that was really nice, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Anyway, let's get into the article and talk through this legislation. All right, so this is the article on The Conversation, which is usually really good. I mean, it is opinionated because they're getting expert opinion. So this is Professor Ben White and Professor Lindy Wilmot, who are both professors in law. So I think the key things to note is that there is a kind of implementation period. So it doesn't just become legal tomorrow. There's an 18-month implementation period, which is a good idea because there will be a high demand for it at the start, with all the people who have been waiting and are essentially wishing to have voluntary assisted dying. There'll be like a little spike at the start, so they need to make sure that they have the capacity to deal with that. So essentially what's the legislation is available to an adult with decision-making capacity who has an advanced and progressive illness that will cause death, likely within 6 months or 12 months for neurodegenerative conditions. I think that really captures motor neuron disease as a main issue, because we know about motor neuron disease that it is progressive, and so it's for those who want it. Like, this is not forced upon anyone, it's for those who want it. It's good to have this as an option, and often just having this as an option can appease a lot of the angst around death, because you know that you have this option should things not go well, and that can really make you feel more at peace, as opposed to just thinking, oh my gosh, if things don't go well, I'll be put into an ambulance and sent to hospital against my will, because that's not what I want. I want to pass away peacefully and in my own home, you know. And there was unfortunately a horrible situation at a hospital I work at, where someone died in the ambulance waiting bay who was on a palliative, I believe they were on a palliative care pathway. I'll share an article down below. And so I think that's really prompted to expedite this law, so that people aren't dying in ambulance waiting bays, because no one should have to die like that lonely and in such an inappropriate place. So other eligibility criteria include the patient is suffering and their choice is voluntary and enduring. Okay, so that is now where things get complicated. What is enduring? What is voluntary? Because it gets complicated when you're old. You feel guilty that people are caring for you. So you need to make sure that you feel guilty that people are caring for you. You need to make sure it's not pressure from the family that's making you feel this guilt to want to end your life. And I'm glad I don't have the job of the people who make these decisions, because that's complicated. It does require 2 senior doctors who have completed the mandatory training, and they can conduct the eligibility assessment. There'll also be a voluntary assisted dying board, which will overview the system to make sure it operates safely. Now, one part of this article that I found kind of confronting is the idea that the patient can choose between taking the medicine themselves or having a health practitioner administer the medications to them. And that's actually not something I've thought about before. I've never thought about being the doctor that would administer the medicine that could end the life of a person. And it's a very strange kind of feeling I get when I read that. It feels wrong, actually. Like, you know, everyone's done all their due diligence to make sure that this is like a permanent, enduring request that the patient wants. The patient's also asking for you to do it. But that's a hard job, and I don't know if I would be up for it. But I would take that responsibility very seriously if I was ever to become. I'm just thinking, because I'm a junior doctor, I don't know what specialty I'm going down, so I'm always trying to imagine myself as the different specialists, and what my life would be if I was a palliative care physician, for example. So that's a hard situation. The rest of the article just goes through the kind of history with the other states, that Victoria was the first. The territories don't have it because of a law in the 90s that prevented them from being able to make laws around this, which seems like a problem in my view. Anyway, I won't go into that. That's complicated. But at the moment, it's just in the States. And the final thing is the importance of these, in Victoria, the voluntary assisted dying care navigators. You are in the last months of your life, you do not want to be waiting on hold on a phone to someone who doesn't know what's going on, or being in the complex chaos of what is Australian healthcare. Although it's wonderful and it's public and it's on an international scale quite effective and a good healthcare system, it still is bloody hard to navigate, especially for someone who's in the last months of life. So I think these navigators will be very, very important. Anyway, that's all I wanted to kind of raise as a kind of discussion point. If you guys want to kind of have a bit more of a discussion about it, join the Discord server down below, and we can talk about it on the group chat there. And keen to hear your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you enjoy this kind of content, please leave some feedback down below, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want more of this kind of content. And I wish you all just a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, bye for now.